And I think we're live. And it looks like, let's see here, we're going live on YouTube, and looks like we're going live on the other locations. Let's make sure. As always, we always have to make sure before we start. And it's not coming up yet on YouTube. That's interesting. Are we live? We are live on X. Oh, there we go. Now we're going live. It took a little bit of time. We went this time. Last time we didn't go live on X immediately. It took some time, but YouTube and everything else came up, and now we're live on YouTube and everything else is back for today. So, go figure. Happy Independence Day! As I am very excited about this 4th of July. Second year in the house. We got the house lit up, red, white, and blue. We got the burgers and hot dogs ready to go. And boy, do we have a lot to talk about in the world of weather. And of course, we have the Mets game right here as well. Keep an eye on that. They're already up 5-0. Looking good. Beating Walgreens, so I'm very happy about that. So let's take a look at the latest on Hurricane Beryl. I think it's Beryl, the way I read it, the way it is pronounced. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, but that's the way it looks like. But anyway, as of 8 p.m., which just came out, the winds are at 130 miles per hour. Pressure's up to 960 millibars. It's moving to the west-northwest at 20 miles per hour. That's important because anyone who's been on the north side of this circulation, you've been having basically anywhere between 130 to 140 mile per hour sustained winds, plus the forward movement, so you can add easily another 20 miles per hour on top of that in some locations. You're talking about some locations pushing 160 mile per hour sustained winds, driving all that water into Jamaica. Now, that's pretty impressive. This has been a record-breaking storm, okay, based on the data that we know, okay, and that's the reality of the situation. Based on the data, we can only go by what data we have. Is there a chance that we might have missed a major hurricane like this early in the season in the 1800s? Yeah, there's a chance we could have. But we don't have that data, so we can only go by the data we have. So this is the earliest that we have so far. Regardless, it has been an incredibly impressive storm. Luckily, it seems to have peaked when it was over the open waters, and I don't think it's going to get as strong going forward. Beryl right now is moving into an environment that is rather unfavorable. While there's plenty of warm water to deal with, it's moving into an environment with more shear, about 40 knot shear from the south-southwest, and a little bit of dry air. Remember what I was talking about for the past couple of weeks? Hey, look, we have a lot of Sahara dust in the atmosphere. Was running into a little bit of that. So it's going to be going through some weakening stages as it's moving towards the Yucatan Peninsula. I do expect it to put up a bit of a fight. It's not just going to collapse like some of the model guidance was suggesting. And I was telling premium members, hey, look, this is going to weaken, but it's not just going to fall off a cliff. This is probably going to come in as a Category 4 around Jamaica, Category 2, 3 around the Yucatan Peninsula, and then we have to watch out to see what it does in the Gulf of Mexico. But why is that happening? Well, we've had some very interesting reasonings that I got on X. My favorite is that somehow a mystery group flew a jet into the storm and fed it, like Burger King or something, to make it stronger. But weaken before it hit an island, but stronger. In reality, that isn't what happened. You see, when you have a storm like this, right, where you get up to Cat 5, Cat 4, it tends to create its own atmospheric environment. It puts up a heck of a fight from any outside influences. And part of that factor is what you have here. See this outflow here? See this anticyclonic circulation here? So what's happening with this warm core low is that you're driving all the warm air up, right, into the center of the storm. And while it's rising, the moisture involved in it, it has this latent heat release. Now, much like many engines, when you have a heat release, there must be an exhaust. So your exhaust is that anticyclonic circulation. If you choke off that exhaust, which happens in many hurricanes that are much weaker, you get a rapidly weakening, collapsing storm, right? But when you get into the Cat 4, Cat 5 range, this engine is so powerful that it kind of creates its own little microenvironment. Models do not do a very good job with handling this microenvironment. As we have learned, especially AI models, they have a very difficult time in understanding the rate of intensification and the rate of weakening. So when you look at this, you have to say to yourself, yes, this should be weakening, but it probably won't weaken to the point like down to a tropical storm like what the GFS was suggesting, for example. It doesn't make much sense because of the nature of the storm. So when you reach this point in the storm where you have this type of circulation, you can see some of the shear influences here trying to impede on that upper level circulation, but it's just too strong to just collapse. So it's going to be a very gradual weakening. Now, the other reason why we have gradual weakening is because it's interacting with the island of Jamaica. You see, it has mountains, it has some dry areas involved in it, you have some jungles in there, city factors, dry air can get mixed into the storm. What we are learning here, which is a good lesson, is that warm core lows are very, very fickle beasts. Okay? They can intensify when you least expect it, and they can weaken when you least expect it. In this case, again, this storm is interacting with a larger landmass, and because of that interaction, you're having some weakening of the low-level circulation. But is it going to have a chance to rebound when it moves over in this area? Well, you see this feature right here? This feature right here is going to start to impede on this whole structure. And so this is why we're seeing this gradual weakening taking place in this storm. The other factor that caused, in my opinion, impressive strengthening is the state of the entire atmosphere as a whole. Now, obviously, we have to touch on the fact of global warming, okay? So let's just knock this out of the park. What would be the primary factor for global warming issues, right? Well, it's the warm Atlantic. Look, guys, I know that some people don't want to admit it, and some people want to think the world's going to end, but at the end of the day, the fact of the matter is this. The Atlantic Ocean right now is at the sea surface temperature range that you would see in August around the Lesser Antilles, for example, where this storm really blew up, and the Eastern Caribbean. That matters. That's like putting nitroglycerin in your tank. It's going to boom, go, okay? So you have these factors involved here, okay, that can really intensify a storm. Another factor to consider, to be frank, is some of those factors with the volcano a couple of years ago, okay? Tonga, okay? Why would this be a factor? Well, see, this is the stratosphere here on July 2nd in the morning when our hurricane down around here, let's see if I can zoom in a little bit more. Good. Okay, right around the Caribbean, had temperatures that were below normal. Why does this matter to me so much? Well, you have to understand the whole atmospheric column, right? So, when the stratosphere is below normal in the Caribbean, that means that your stratosphere is shrinking and your troposphere is expanding. So if your troposphere is expanding, it's going to allow for convection to really grow. So there's some influences, although it's going to be hard to piece them together. But I want to at least bring it up to acknowledge the fact that some of that factor does play into the intensification rate because it allows for your convection to grow much higher in the atmosphere. To me, the primary cause for this intensification so far, and I'm sure many people are going to be studying this, so it's a good idea to wait for that research. But my preliminary, I can't talk tonight, thinking behind this is that the very warm waters combined with weak shear set up the environment for rapid intensification. Now, what's really unusual about this whole setup is where this low developed. Now, you might be saying, Stephen, it developed in the tropics. Why is that unusual? The intertropical convergence zone this time of year typically doesn't support these type of storms right now, not just because of the state of the ocean, but usually it's further south. This year it's a tick further north, slightly. I'm not sure exactly why. It could be the factor that we're seeing the changing ESNO states, and you're also seeing a changing QBO state, so maybe the position of the intertropical convergence zone was a tick further north, which allowed these low pressure systems to develop. But remember when I was talking about all that Sahara dust? Well, this whole storm developed to the south of all that Sahara dust. And by the time it started to interact with the storm had developed enough of an upper level structure to push back against it. And then once it got into the Eastern Caribbean, it was no longer a factor. So I'm looking at all these features, and they all kind of came together to set up a perfect scenario where you had essentially a record-breaking storm that we know of. Okay, I'll give you that. Is there a chance that we might not know of another storm like this? Sure, but as of right now, I gotta go with what we have, right? I think that's reasonable. So, in terms of where is Beryl going? Well, let's see here. The NHC is tracking this through the Yucatan Peninsula. So, once it moves through the Yucatan Peninsula, that's a lot of land. That's going to be a lot of disruption, and it's expected to weaken into a tropical storm. Once it gets into this area here, well, you do have warm waters, but because of the previous storm that we had out here, and also a couple of disturbances and frontal boundaries, we did have some upwelling. So the waters aren't high octane like what you would normally expect for this time of year. So they're a bit cooler. So while I do like the idea of some intensification, I don't see this blowing up right now. And the other factor here is the state of the weather pattern at that point. Okay, so should you be concerned if you're, let's say, in Houston or in Louisiana? I don't think so. And the reason why is because it's going to be awfully hot down there. Well, yeah, I mean, it's the southeastern Gulf Coast. It's always hot. But what I mean by that is that we're going to have a heat ridge. And that heat ridge is basically going to act like a block to prevent this storm from moving any further north than maybe, let's say, Brownsville. And with that, we're going to have our developing ridge here. So when you see this signal here, you're going to have southwesterly winds, so some vertical wind shear, plenty of warm water to feed on, but not as warm as it can be, and most likely a track that's going right into this area here. And that's essentially what's being shown here on all the model guidance. You have one outlier here, and all your model guidance is converging here. The reason why they're all converging here is because of the nature of our ridge complex and where it's setting up. So I saw on some social media accounts, it's going to hit the East Coast. It's going to hit the Central Gulf Coast. It's going to move into Florida. You know, the typical guys that run around calling F6, Category 6 hurricanes and F10 tornadoes and nonsense like that. there was never any threat to the East Coast on this. And it's because of the pattern that we're in right now. Okay? I'll make this simple for you for much of this summer. If there's going to be a storm threat for Florida or for eastern Florida or for the East Coast, these storms are going to have to track through the north side of the Greater Antilles. So to the north of Puerto Rico, to the north of Hispaniola, to the north of Cuba, okay, and maybe into the Bahamas or north of the Bahamas to be a threat for the eastern United States. Anyone that's making a solution or a graphic with the storm cutting up through the Caribbean don't understand that you cannot take a storm and drive it straight into the Bermuda High. It's not how these patterns work. So location matters. To the north of the Caribbean, yes, we should be concerned. We as in the northern Atlantic. To the south or over the Caribbean, then no, it's more of a Gulf Coast threat, if anything. So that's the general rule that we're going to have for this summer. That's going to be one of the goalposts, right? So in this setup, we know where most likely the storm's going to be heading. We'll still keep an eye out there for Houston, but it's really low. Most likely somewhere between Brownsville and northeastern coastal Mexico is where Beryl's going to end up. And in terms of strength, I could see a Category 1, maybe a Category 2 hurricane at the most, if conditions align just right. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. And in terms of the remnants, it's probably going to be passing through northern Mexico. I'd watch out for Texas in terms of very heavy rainfall, central Texas. And then whatever's left of it is going to be lifted up through the plains. Could we see remnants of it? Maybe a thunderstorm complex, like maybe 7 days later. But I wouldn't get all worked up about it. That's for sure. Now, what about the future? Are we expecting even more storms? Is there going to be a huge run where we have to get worried about multiple storms and the worst hurricane season ever? Nope. Actually, it's going to get very quiet. You see, the MJO is moving into a bit of an unfavorable zone here. And what that basically means is you're going to get a lot of sinking air over the Atlantic Ocean. Now, this projection goes through much of July. Starts to weaken towards the end of July. But the way this is setting up is that you're going to have a lot of substance in place through much of July. And so it's going to get pretty quiet in the tropics once we get rid of Beryl. Once we get rid of that storm, I don't expect much going forward. It's going to get very, very quiet. Now, the one caveat I'd put in there is if we get like a cold front stalled out around the Gulf of Mexico or off the East Coast and it just kind of festers, you can get a subtropical low pressure system kind of buzz up in that scenario. I'm not expecting it, but that'd be a perfect example of a situation where activity could bubble up. But other than that, in terms of the intertropical convergence zone, any type of tropical waves, this signal really suppresses that potential over the Atlantic Ocean throughout much of the rest of this month. So a bit of good news. It gives people a chance to rebound, get their supplies together, and get prepared for what could be an active August. So wanted to share that with you. And to kind of get an idea what that looks like, here's our hurricane, okay, on the model guidance. This is the ensemble model guidance. This is what we call the SpaghettiOs model guidance because it kind of gives you an idea of all the different low pressure systems. So it looks like little SpaghettiOs that we used to have as kids. So you can see it's marching through into the Caribbean, into the Gulf of Mexico, and then look off to the rest of the Atlantic. Quiet as can be. Okay? No SpaghettiOs for you. That's it. Done. And that goes all the way through into the middle of July. That is pretty quiet. Okay? The only SpaghettiOs that you have is all the way up in Canada, which obviously are extratropical low pressure systems, cold core lows, and not anything tropical. Again, when I was talking about, hey, we might have to watch out for a rogue low pressure or two, this is a perfect example of that signal where you kind of get a cold front stalled out here. Uh, Basically a very weak trough at this point, and you can get a rogue low pressure system pop up as a potential here. But other than that, not really seeing a lot out of here. I mean, it is dead quiet, and that all matches up very nicely with the MJO phase that we're going to be moving into in the area of sinking air. So I wanted to share some of that good news, because we're not about doom and gloom here. We're about responsibility, and we're about getting the facts out. Okay, so we have seen a very impressive storm. It's one that's going to be studied. There are several factors, including climate change factors, to consider that cause the intensification of this storm. But the good news is that we are well prepared, that many in Jamaica, although it is very, very bad out there, and I know that some of you guys in chat, you have some friends out there, so hopefully everything works out well. But the good news is that everyone was warned well ahead, we're able to prepare, and now we build our structures such that we can withstand these storms. So that's always a good sign. Mets just give up a home run. Well, it's 5-4. Oh, well. One of those nights. It's going to be interesting. Now, let's talk about what's going on around our neck of the woods. And, of course, then I will answer all of your questions. It looks like we have some good ones out there, as always. Let's see here. And we have some good ones here setting up on YouTube, and we'll check that out, as always. So let me just finish up this part right here. Now, right now it is beautiful out. A little bit more humid. High pressure is moving off the coast. Notice our dew points are now pushing into the 60s. Have a few 50s here in central New Jersey. Our temperatures this evening are in the mid to upper 70s. Overall, not too bad. Really pleasant. Pleasant enough for some knuckleheads out there shooting off crazy loud fireworks. I'm telling you, some of these fireworks are illegal that they're shooting. I mean, look, I love a good little pop here, pop there. I heard a big boom earlier this evening. Susan, you heard that too, right?
Yeah, I was outside. I definitely
It sounded like a cannon. I'm like, we don't have to
I didn't just hear it, I felt it.
Right? I mean, we don't actually have to pretend like we're actually in the Revolutionary War. We could just, a little sparkler. Especially it's so dry. So that's my first point. If you're going to be using fireworks, barbecuing, anything, be careful. It's been dry. This grass can light up very, very easily. You can end up with a brush fire or worse. So please use caution when you're out there, whether you're grilling or having a campfire or shooting off fireworks. It can lead to some serious problems. So just be careful out there. And you can see the return of our moisture. Our tropical weather pattern is getting ready to return. It's been quiet for the past couple of days, but we're starting to see fundamental changes in our weather pattern. And it's driven by the fact that our high pressure systems shift off the coast, and our whole upper level structure is now shifting to what we call a Bermuda high. So these cold fronts here, they're going to be quite a theme. Another theme is going to be these troughs. This trough was a cold front. It runs right into this high pressure system. The cold front doesn't really move all that much. The air mass starts to modify, and the cold front washes out. So what you end up with is what's left of these showers and thunderstorms. So in the infrared satellite picture, and we're getting in these satellite pictures from WeatherTap this evening, you can see the setup starting to evolve here with our Bermuda high. Some cloud cover is increasing. I had one person ask me, is this due to jets flying in the air? And then I said, no, this is called summer, because we have moisture transport coming in from the Gulf of Mexico. So we have a lot of high level moisture in the atmosphere. So we're seeing that very nicely here on the water vapor satellite picture as well. Look at this zoomed out here. You can see we have these little upper level features getting cut off from the polar jet stream, and the broader upper level ridge starting to take shape here. Here is Beryl marching its way through, starting to feel some of that shear. And you can see this trough starting to establish itself over the Great Lakes. So what you end up with is starting to get this setup here, where you're pulling tropical moisture right from, well, the Caribbean and sending it right up the East Coast. So you're starting to see that in the upper level winds. And there's Beryl right here. There's our wind shear that we were talking about, right? And here is our ridge that's going to be driving this storm right into portions of Mexico. Here's our new trough starting to establish itself. So this polar trough, again, because of this time of year, the troughs aren't able to dig as far south. So you're looking at this and saying, well, Steve, look, this trough is going to dig and we're going to have a cold front move through. No. In this scenario, the negative PDO setup that we've been talking about all spring and now into summer sets up a nice trough in the Gulf of Alaska and a trough here in the central part of the country and towards the Great Lakes. And we are on the eastern side of that trough. And we're on the western side of that ridge. And so what that starts to set up, and it's starting to show up very nicely here at 850 millibars, is this circulation from the tropics through the Gulf Coast and up towards our neck of the woods. And that is what we're starting to see in the model guidance. Now, this type of pattern does not produce a great deal of severe thunderstorms, believe it or not. But it does support a lot of tropical downpour potentials. So, for example, for tomorrow, not a lot of lifting here. Not a lot of strong push of any type of cold fronts, but just enough lifting to trigger a tropical air mass. You can see the 850 millibar temperatures are starting to drive into the region, pushing to 20 degrees Celsius. So we're talking about 80s and 90s for highs. But here's the big deal, moisture. This, again, just so you guys know, and we'll zoom in, is precipitable water value for tomorrow evening. The reason why this really catches my attention is typically we're in this light green yellow zone, 1.2 to maybe 2 inches at most. This is typically what we see in summer. Warmer temperatures, the atmosphere can hold more water. When you start going above 2 inches and you start getting to this 2.5 range and 3 range in your precipitable water values, that's a lot of moisture. And what that tells you is that you have a lot of potential here with these thunderstorms to drop a lot of rain in a short period of time in a very small area. So we have the tropical moisture, we have the pesky short waves. All we need now is a trigger. And that is essentially what we're going to be setting up here when we look at our CAPE values here. So we have a lot of energy here in terms of our CAPE values pushing up above 2,000 joules per kilogram, some locations as high as 3,000 joules per kilogram. So what that tells us is that we have a lot of energy stored up, ready to be unleashed. All you need is a trigger. That trigger can be a sea breeze front, an old outflow boundary, or simply a trough coming in from the west. And so unfortunately, along with the fireworks that you might want to be shooting, well, you're also going to be dealing with some of nature's fireworks, and that is some thunderstorms capable of some very heavy downpours. This is the precipitable water value on the NAM guidance. I wanted to give you a mesoscale model depiction of this scenario, and you could see pretty much what I'm warning about here with a lot of moisture capable in these thunderstorms. And the reason why I'm really playing that up and really trying to explain why that's important is that if you have a lot of moisture in the atmosphere, you end up with this type of skew T or atmospheric profile in the afternoon hours starting tomorrow, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and into next week. And that is where you have a lot of moisture, the storm gets lifted, all that deep tropical moisture down at the surface gets lifted into this dry air at 700 millibars or 500 millibars or 600 millibars. You get the idea. Mid-level dry air. It condenses, you get evaporational cooling, and that that area of moisture that condenses and cools becomes heavier. And what happens is that cool air slams to the ground. And this is how you get a rogue severe thunderstorm. So again, the idea here, we're not going to see much in the way of vertical wind shear here. Not really all that impressive when you talk about winds at 20 knots at the mid-levels of the atmosphere. Not that impressive. But what you do have here is a lot of potential of air rapidly crashing to the ground, which can cause straight line wind damage. So most thunderstorms, a heavy downpour, rumble of thunder, some flash of lightning, no big deal. Your picnic might get ruined. But we will have the potential for that rogue thunderstorm in this type of sounding environment to produce wind gusts over 55 miles per hour that could produce an isolated severe thunderstorm in this type of pattern. And so that's essentially what we're starting to see in some of the mesoscale guidance. This is for tomorrow afternoon. Again, I wouldn't take this verbatim, but you get the idea here. These little thunderstorms popping up, capable of heavy downpours, a heavy rainfall for about 15, 20 minutes, and then it blows out. So if you're interested about the fireworks, well, unfortunately, I can't rule out some impacts in terms of weather for your outdoor celebration. So just so that you're aware, and that is going to be a theme going on through much of this summer. This is the integrated vapor transport. So this is basically the way for us to see how moisture is being transported in the atmosphere, right? From the surface up to 200 millibars. So the entire atmospheric column, right? So the reason why I'm going to use this is that look at the evolution here. You see all your moisture transported, moved into the Gulf of Mexico, up the coast, and then depending on the interaction of cold fronts, you're getting this interaction of tropical air masses. Any cold front that moves through is going to be modified significantly, so you might get one day of knocked off of lower humidity, but then it just comes right back on you. So in terms of your precipitable water value, we're going to see plenty of potential here with our precipitable water values rising up over 2 inches. So this is going to be a summer setting up, the way that we're looking at this, of a lot of haves and have-nots. It might really show up in your garden or your lawn, where one town may end up with 2-3 inches of rain above normal for this summer, and another town, because of these thunderstorms, will struggle to get any rain. So it's going to be pretty interesting, where the I-95 corridor, like around Newark, for example, could end up with significant urban flooding from some of these thunderstorms that are setting up, while locations like Freehold, New Jersey gets no rain at all. It's been sunny for the past 7 days. So it's going to be one of those type of summers, and it's going to most likely drive people who are trying to grow their lawn or their garden or whatnot, struggling with this rainfall potential this summer. No signs, again, of any type of tropical impacts from the northern mid-Atlantic. A lot of pesky cold fronts, a lot of pesky tropical downpours, but no organized major storms. So that is my overview for tonight. And now it's time to answer all of your questions. So let's see. Of course, as always, we answer the premium discussions first. Let's see here. July already, where is the year going? We were just having this discussion. July, I can't believe it's July already.
July 1st, we blinked, and I mean, June 1st, and we blinked, and now it's July 1st.
I feel like June was a month. Was a week. Well, yeah, June's a month. Duh. As you can tell, I do need a couple days off. June felt like a week, and July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd felt like a month. Crazy. I know why it felt like a week. It's because my Mets actually played well. So I everything's going fast and I can't enjoy it. That's why. Happy Independence Day. Internet is very slow today. I've actually had that problem with some of the Satellite pictures, I agree. Watching Godzilla vs. Destroyer right now. Let's see here. I got that.
How many copies do you have of that?
I got 4 copies of that. Four different copies. In English, Chinese, and Japanese, and I'm not sure what the other one is. I think it might be Japanese, but English subtitle. Let's see. I started to slowly buy supplies just in case something comes up the coast this season. That's a good idea, Andrew. That is a very, very good idea. That's what we're doing as well. Here's the deal. Given the Bermuda High setup and the setup of the trough generally around the Great Lakes, I don't see any storms getting pulled into the coast because I know someone's going to bring up Sandy. But I definitely can see storms riding up the coast. Heavy rainfall, all that stuff, especially if they get around the Bahamas. So hopefully we're wrong. We get the cold front pushed off the coast just enough and it stays away from us. But that's certainly going to be a theme we're going to be keeping an eye on, especially when we get to August and September. The amplification of the polar jet and the continuing subtropical jet is impressive. Yes, it definitely is, and it's because we really haven't established our La Nina. That's going to be a theme for the rest of this tropical season. Yes, the warm water is going to lead to rapid intensification, but is the lack of a true La Nina so far going to have to cause us to alter how many storms we actually see? Perhaps not the intensity, but the number of storms. Let's see here. I note that the overall ozone level seems higher for this time of year with a solar max ongoing. Agreed. I wonder if Tonga eruption is influencing that. There is some research on that, but it's inconclusive still. Also, what is the latest on La Nina? La Nina is La Nada right now. It's not established at all. It's not established in the SOI. It's not established in 3.4. The rate it's going, it might not be established to the end of the summer, maybe fall. It's taking its time. Subsurface really isn't growing. It's kind of stands still. So we're not really seeing any push either way. I have friends who live in Jamaica, really worried for them. I agree. If you're on the north side of the island, you're doing a little bit better. On the south side of the island, well, not good, unfortunately. Let's see. I have friends with family in Jamaica, very worried as it looks even weaker. It could get really bad. Yeah, unfortunately, it's not good. Looks like the northwestern Atlantic has warmed quite a bit. Will that impact the western Atlantic ridge? Not really at this point. So to speak, the damage has been done in terms of setting up the process. We would expect some warming because we're moving into the heart of summer. So it's typical to see that warming take shape of the Atlantic waters. But I would say that we're pretty much establishing our Western Atlantic ridge based on the nature and the gradient of the sea surface temperatures and also the nature of the upper level pattern overall. Is Friday weather going to be more of the same as tomorrow's muggy with chance of pop-up thunderstorms? Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Probably Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and also next Friday. And possibly the weekend after that too. We're stuck in this pattern, unfortunately, where we're going to be dealing with these muggy conditions. I don't see right now any truly oppressive heat, like 100 degrees for a temperature, something like that nature. I see a lot of days, as we were discussing in the summer forecast, where we're bouncing between 87 and 93, somewhere in that ballpark, with a lot of humidity. So if you're used to using saunas, basically it's like being in a sauna all summer, which is just lovely. But at the same time, we'll have our breaks with these thunderstorms. Let's see if we have anything on YouTube. YouTube's pretty quiet. Is there anything on X? We have a question on X. Outstanding.
I think I'm on X. I don't even know what the hell I am anymore.
Who knows? Okay, first of all, happy 4th of July. Thank you. Happy 4th of July to you. Will this hurricane season be more active through the rest of July, August, September? We talked about July. Doesn't look all that active because of the MJO state. But August and September, usually that's where we see our peak. That's when it could be a lot more active. We're going to watch to see how this La Nina plays out, because if there's more vertical wind shear because the subtropical jet stream is stronger, because we haven't established a La Nina, that would limit the number of short waves that actually develop. So that's certainly a factor. Jeff has a question. July NOAA outlook is warmer than normal in the east. That makes sense. But with the southwest ridge moving east, that should provide for more northwest. See more. There it is. More northwest flow in the northeast, or does the southeast Atlantic high overcome the influence and keep the temperatures warm and air humid? The issue is the location of the trough. The location of this trough on a lot of the guidance basically bounces between the upper Midwest and the eastern Great Lakes. That's going to allow for dry air to move into locations like Syracuse, for example, and Cleveland a lot easier. But for our neck of the woods, basically you set up where you have a lot of these cold fronts dying out as they approach, or they stall out altogether. So even when the cold front moves through, by the time it gets to us, it's modified so much that there isn't a huge difference in the air mass. So, for example, the cold front two weeks ago, when it finally came through, it got our air mass dropping off significantly in terms of humidity, and we had really 4 beautiful days. Now it's down to about 2.5. The next one, maybe a day. Okay, and it's because these air masses in the polar Pacific modified air masses that are coming in are modifying much faster because of the tropical influence that we're dealing with. Let's see here. It's better than 100 degrees with really high humidity. Yes, I 100% agree. That is not fun at all. If summer was like the past week, 80-something, close to no humidity, you never hear me complain about summer. Oh yeah, I mean, you're not going to get any argument from me. I mean, I'm not a big fan of summer at all. I like winter, and the reason why is this: when it gets cold out, I can just layer. It fall's great too, but again, when it's fall and it's chilly, I put on a sweater. No problem. Okay? When it's summer and 100 degrees, I can't exactly walk around naked. Okay?
At least we have central air now.
Well, yes. Now we have central air. Thank God. But when we lived in an apartment, oh my God, that was just murder. So, yeah. I'm not a fan of summer. So, is it possible La Nina just never gets established and stays cold neutral through the summer and fall? And we'll throw in winter as well. Yeah, it's absolutely possible. And it's something that I'm watching very carefully. I'm very concerned about that factor because we went into the summer thinking, okay, La Nina's going to get going. It's going to start evolving here. We're going to see La Nina take hold. And this is going to adjust our forecast for the tropics. It's going to be very active tropics. These are very reasonable ideas at the time when we're looking at the data, not just the model data, but the observations. Now we're at a point where we must stop and consider, hey, while we have plenty of warm water, there's no doubt about that. I don't think anyone's going to argue that. We're not seeing the La Nina conditions. The SOI isn't going positive. We're not seeing the reduction in strength in the subtropical jet stream like you would in a La Nina environment. So if you're not seeing that, that means you're going to have more vertical wind shear in the Atlantic. If you're going to have more vertical wind shear in the Atlantic, you must reduce the number of storms you see. So you throw in a quiet July going forward after this, and you might have to start making some adjustments. But August and September and October, it could get action packed. So we have to wait and see. But it's certainly something that's on my radar that we're talking about right now. You're aware of it. I'm aware of it. We're not ignoring it. We're not trying to pretend it doesn't exist. It's something that has my attention, and this would greatly impact my expectations not only for the fall and tropical season, but then the winter as well. Because now we're not talking about a La Nina. Now we're talking about a cold neutral environment, which can lead to interaction with an active polar and subtropical jet stream. The polar jet stream can still be a little bit stronger. There's still other factors involved in that whole setup, but we certainly aren't talking about a strong La Nina. That's dead. Anyone that's pushing that idea, first of all, it really wasn't a good idea to support that or push that in the first place. But anyone that still is doing that is delusional. It ain't happening, period. So now the real question is whether we have a cold neutral state or we have a weak La Nina state. So certainly interesting times ahead, that is for sure. We have a question on YouTube here. Is there any way to predict when Atlantic multidecadal oscillation will shift from warm to cold phase? Didn't the last warm phase start in the 1990s? It has been interesting to see the evolution of this AMO state. Based on the data that I'm seeing, I expect us to go back to a cold state likely in the 2030s. But there are factors that we must consider with climate change, to be honest with you, that could be altering that whole process of going back and forth. And I don't know that answer yet. That's the truth. Because I would expect it to shift, because what we have right now is positive AMO plus other factors. It's not just positive AMO. Positive AMO would mean I have slightly above normal temperatures, but not temperatures that you would see in August. Okay? So that's kind of where we're at right now. Will it be possible to have another July like last year with thunderstorms and heat waves? I'm not buying the heat wave idea just yet. Thunderstorms, yes. Definitely a high potential for thunderstorms. But heat waves, which is 90 plus for 3 days straight, it might be a little bit of touch and go depending on your location. So, for example, if you're 89, 90, 91, then back to 89, that's not a heat wave. It's just really uncomfortable. But it's not technically a heat wave because you're not seeing 90, 91, 91, 91 like that. That's a heat wave. So that is pretty much where we're at there. Let's see what else we got in the live chat. Let's see here. These past 2 growing seasons have been tough. Agreed. Spring is wet. Can't get crops in the ground. Rain shuts off all summer. Then the rain turns back on in the fall. We can't harvest. What are your thoughts of this being the new norm? Well, it's something that we really need to consider. I would agree. In the terms of this, I think what we're seeing with these rain patterns is driven by the unusual nature that we've been observing with El Nino and La Nina. I think we can all agree that the El Nino and La Nina phases have been out of phase with what you would expect in the SLI. So in terms of forcing mechanisms, and with that, you're seeing a fundamental change in where you're seeing your convection and your rain patterns. So I think that's what we're seeing right now. Honestly, I think that's exactly what we're seeing right now and why you're seeing those observations. So I'm not sure if this is a new norm because there's debate as far as what influence the Tonga volcano had on these mechanisms and when that gets flushed out. Do we revert back and go back to a more traditional state, or is this a new state altogether? So we're still working on that, but that's a great question. Okay. Do we have any more questions on X or anywhere else?
I'm hopping around. Hold on. No.
Okay. Let's see what we got on YouTube. I think we're good there. And of course, my Mets have blown the lead against Walgreens. Here's the thing with that bullpen. I don't know how to solve it, but then again, I'm not a GM, so I guess really I shouldn't know how to solve it. But I think if they find a way to get a couple of good relief pitchers, and again, they've won the first 2 games. I mean, they're not going to sweep every series, for God's sakes. So they won the first 2 games. We'll see what happens. Maybe they pull this out. Who knows? But my motto is this. It's not every game. Just win the series. If you win every series or most of the series, the rest of the way, you're going to be in a good place. I can't ask for more than that. Another influence I have raised is all the high latitude water vapor from the rocket launches, particularly Starlink. That's so small, though. Okay? Look at the comparisons that we're talking about between a volcano injecting a ton of water vapor and a tiny little rocket. I know it seems large, but on the planetary scale, it's not as much as we think. One thing that is interesting, if you really want to think about it, and this is in terms of our satellites and whatnot, we have so much junk up there that we might not be able to put up much more satellites because we have all this junk floating around the Earth. So we might be locking ourselves in to like go to the moon and stuff like that. Well, first we have to go through all the space junk. So Yankees are in a pummeled or get pummeled phase. I'm not sure. Are they winning or losing now? I'm not sure. Oh, geez, they're losing to the Reds? Who am I to argue? Well, who am I? Well, I'm losing to the friggin' Walgreens, so I refuse to call them the other thing. They're Walgreens. They use that signal. It's that W. They're officially Walgreens. Let's see. I think that's it. And it is 8:53 p.m. If we don't have any more questions, I think I shall call it a night before I go into a longer rant about the Mets. I think that's a good idea. Because I could probably go on a long one at this point. Do we have any more on your end, huh? All right. Doesn't look like it here. And we're good here.
Hold on, I'm hopping around. I'm trying to cover a lot of territory.
Oh. Yeah. See if there's any.
It's not a question, but.
What's that? Thanks for the info on the hurricane. My sister works for the Red Cross headquartered in Houston. I was a bit concerned. I passed along a synopsis of what you said to her. I think she is more relieved that it will not be as bad as many have predicted. Here's the thing. What I would say is this, okay? I really don't see this going much further north based on all the data I'm seeing and the overall average of model guidance. I always say keep an eye on this once it gets through the Yucatan Peninsula, okay? If this holds on to a pretty good circulation once it gets through the Yucatan Peninsula, then we got to be a little bit more wary, okay? But the Yucatan Peninsula is very mountainous. It tends to tear up these storms quite a bit. So it's not like it's going out through the northern tip. It's like going through the full landmass. So it's going to get a butt kicked before it gets out into the Gulf of Mexico. And then the nature of the ridge that's building, I think northeast Mexico, maybe Brownsville, maybe. So we'll watch that and keep an eye on that. Of course, I'll have updates every day. Moving forward for the rest of this weekend, we have weekend updates. So that's updates in the morning and then peace. Unless something is developing, a severe thunderstorms, then I'll pop right in. But that's pretty much what we're going to be looking at for updates for the rest of this weekend. No live chat next week, but we'll be back on the, I think the 17th, the following week. So that's it for tonight. Thank you as always for joining, and please, especially with all these fireworks and whatever else hell they're shooting out there, stay safe out there.